Good morning from the Cambodian capital city. We are back here in Phnom Penh for two reasons. Number one, I'm going to catch a flight out of here in a few days. And number two, there are some traces here of Cambodia's dark past. Now, you might know that in the 20th century, this country was run by one of the biggest lunatics in human history. The name Pol Pot is really synonymous with evil. It's the worst expression of communism, and it's just one of the darkest periods in human history. And here in the Cambodian capital, we still have a few traces of that dark past, and now I'm going to show you one of those traces. But before that, I'm going to explain the history of what happened in a short clip. Before we talk about Pol Pot's murderous regime, it's essential to explain the historical context. Between 1968 and 1975, Cambodia was engulfed in a brutal civil war. The Cambodian Civil War was fought between the government of Cambodia and the so-called Khmer Rouge forces. Initially, the Khmer Rouge was just a small group of insurgents who were hiding in the jungle. It was a communist movement without a lot of power or influence. However, the Cambodian Civil War soon became a proxy war. The government of Cambodia was supported by the United States as well as their allies in South Vietnam, whereas the Khmer Rouge was supported by North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong also had bases on the territory of Cambodia. At some point, the government of Cambodia, initially neutral in the Vietnam War, allowed the US Army to drop bombs on these camps. When the tide of the Vietnam War started to turn, the Cambodian Civil War also took another direction. After the US Army had left and the northern Vietnamese forces won against the South and reunified the country, the Khmer Rouge was also victorious in Cambodia. In 1975, the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, entered the Cambodian capital city and took over power. The next 3.5 years would be one of the darkest moments in human history. After the Khmer Rouge took power, they wanted to turn Cambodia into a communist agrarian society. They called this new state Democratic Kampuchea. In a matter of days, Cambodian cities were evacuated. People were forcibly relocated into rural areas and they had to work in collective farms. Currencies were abolished and everybody who was deemed an anti-communist or a supposed enemy of the state was immediately executed. In just over 3 years, Pol Pot and his regime killed about 2 million Cambodians, 1/4 of the population. Many of these people passed through one of Pol Pot's prisons. The most infamous one was S21. Here, they were interrogated until they gave names of other supposed anti-communists and then they were tortured and killed. Their bodies were dumped into mass graves all over the country. Today, these places are known as the killing fields and Cambodia is still full of them. The horrors only ended when the Vietnamese decided to invade Cambodia in 1979. Pol Pot was no longer their ally and the Vietnamese army, battle-hardened and victorious against the big United States, made mincemeat out of Pol Pot's forces. The Khmer Rouge forces had no chance and Vietnam put a new regime in place in 1979. Today we are going to visit one of the places where Pol Pot's abhorrent killing spree took place. Alright, so you have seen my clip about the Khmer Rouge and the history of what happened here in Cambodia. Now it's time to go visit Pol Pot's infamous S21 prison. Let's go. One?
One?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So we are now here in the courtyard of S21 prison, and as I explained in my intro, the capital city of Phnom Penh was completely evacuated after it fell to Khmer Rouge forces in 1975. And then between 1975 and 1976, many buildings, including schools, were repurposed into prison and extermination camps. And this is one of those. So this used to be a high school where children were going to school, and then all the rooms were just divided into cells. So now let's go inside. So basically what happened is when the inmates were tortured, they could get killed and they would be killed anyways. So the security guards and the torturers, they already knew that the prisoner was going to get killed. They just tried to extract information, and for that purpose they tried to inflict as much pain as possible and then the prisoner would usually just give a confession, which is the case in many regimes like that. And then they would have had their confessions and they would find more people to torture. Now we go up to the second floor of S21 prison. This is actually building A, so there are many different buildings here, and this is the first one. So yeah, let's continue. Here we have another torture room, but this one is much bigger. I suppose they brought bigger weapons in here, but yeah, it's basically all just torture cells. And here we have a cell with more than one bed, so I suppose that there were more prisoners in here and then they would be tortured separately or together. It's absolutely mind-boggling, this. Just when you imagine what kind of pain a human being can inflict to another human being, it's just very hard to comprehend. When Pol Pot came to power, he founded the so-called state of Cambodia, and this state was supposedly the utopian communist agrarian society. There would be no cities, there would be no intellectual people, there would just be farmers who would be self-sufficient. The results of that were absolutely mind-blowing, because all the cities of Cambodia were evacuated and people were forcibly moved to the countryside to work in the fields. Now let's have a look at what happened there exactly. Thousands and thousands of people arrested for something as insignificant as wearing glasses or speaking a foreign language. That's what could get you killed in democratic Cambodia, as the country was called. And yeah, here we have pictures and pictures and pictures of all these people. Most of them passed through here and then they made a confession, because the confession was extracted under torture, and then they were killed with no mercy in the killing fields and dumped into mass graves. Yeah, this is definitely not a place for the faint-hearted. If you are coming to Cambodia and you see this, you just realize how evil people can become. So basically lots of sports fields, because of course sports like football, baseball, anything of the sort was banned under Pol Pot. And these fields, so these football pitches, they were just turned into killing fields or into rice fields, depending on what was needed at the time. And yeah, this is what happened here. It's just, I mean, it's very, very hard to comprehend when you are 50 years later and when you see the Cambodian people today who are just so joyful and nice and, you know, welcoming. When you consider what happened to their country just about 50 years ago, it's an absolute travesty. Now I can stand in here, but they had between 5 and 10 people in these cells at any one given time. And yeah, that would have been very claustrophobic. But I think having small cells was the least of their problems in this prison, because, as I mentioned before, 20,000 inmates and only 7 made it out alive. So I guess the cells themselves weren't the biggest hardship that they were facing. Yeah, so these were the classrooms, obviously, and just one classroom after the other turned into cell blocks. What a horrific period for Cambodian people. And what an evil man who instigated all of this. There you can see, again, the blackboard. Before 1975, you had children learning about the Western world, about values, about maybe business and economics. And then after 1975, you had innocent civilians locked up in here. Now here we are in one of the last rooms of the S21 prison museum, and here we have original skulls, some more skulls, and obviously bones. And then here, this is very, very morbid. a closet full of real skulls collected from killing fields all over the country. And these are the skulls of victims of Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge regime. I mean, it's very, very hard for me to speak here, because when you see this, even if it's just on pictures, but when you know that you are in the place where all of these people were tortured and then brought out to, you know, be executioned, it's just very hard to comprehend. It's very hard to understand how people can do this to other people, especially their own countrymen, in the name of whatever ideology it might be. And here you have a panorama view of the prison. Alright, this is the end of my exploration into Cambodia's dark past. I know that it wasn't the usual fun and light-hearted video that you're used to on my channel, but when you come to Cambodia, it's absolutely crucial to learn about the horrors that happened in this country. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed our little dive into the horrific acts of Pol Pot and his regime. And yeah, thanks very much for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye.